joining us for another episode of A Case of the Mondays. I'm your podcast host, Rameez Kaleem, founder and director of 3R Strategy and author of A Case of the Mondays, a book on pay transparency. I'm joined today by Rachel Cox, Chief People Officer at LCCC. Rachel brings a wealth of experience from fintech scale-ups to global organizations like Ariba and Johnson & Johnson, where she led large-scale transformation projects. As a chartered fellow of the CIPD and mentor, Rachel has unique insights into the evolving world of HR. Today we'll be exploring the challenges of operating without a grading system, why manager capability is crucial in an era of transparency, and how to effectively leverage AI in HR. Welcome to the podcast, Rachel.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the intro.
No, thanks for joining. I'm looking forward to discussing these topics with you, and I'm sure our listeners are keen to hear about, in particular, AI, which I think is a very popular topic right now. But let's start with a grading structure. And if I remember correctly, I don't think you currently have a grading structure in your organization. So what are the main challenges that you encounter without having a grading structure, particularly around, for example, career conversations with employees?
Yeah, so as you mentioned in the intro, I'd spent the early part of my career in really big global organizations. So in there, it's just a given that you have all of these kind of structures in place. I've spent the latter part of my career working in scale-up businesses, anything from 90 employees up to kind of 350. My current organisation, we've got 265, to be precise, employees as at today. And when I joined the business, I was quite surprised actually that the business had job evaluation in place, so roles had been evaluated, but the business hadn't gone to the next step of using that information to create a grading structure. And it was one of my early observations in the company, and spoke to my colleagues on the executive team to understand, has this been discussed? Is there a reason why we've not progressed it? Because, as you said, it's not just a case of, well, a company of a certain size should have it. It's not a tick box, but I could really see from a number of angles where the gap was. So as you mentioned in the intro, it is about helping people understand where they fit in a framework. Job titling can do that to a degree, but unless you're really consistent in your sort of job titling conventions, that doesn't necessarily always work. And we are actually transparent in terms of advertising roles with salary. So people, I guess, can see, well, this is a bigger role, this is a smaller role, but not necessarily. But equally, in my own team, because the job evaluation was done externally, and because the company hadn't, like I said, taken that next step to upskill its own team in this area, I think that really impacted conversations with managers about this. So to take the next step of, looking at what that means in terms of pay benchmarking, naturally managers will always disagree with your pay benchmarks and tell you that you should be paying more. The challenge we had was because we didn't have that reward capability or that understanding of how roles are evaluated and how roles are benchmarked internally, we were overly reliant on an external provider. And what that meant was it really kind of impacted the credibility of the framework, because we couldn't justify the decisions we were making without kind of having to go and, sense check them externally. So one of the first things I did was to try and build some of that capability in-house within my own team, first of all, so that we can have confidently, stand behind our framework and how we pay people, which I believe we can. And then the next step will be to take that to our line managers. So you mentioned we don't have a grading framework, but it's work in progress. It's something that we're developing right now, actually.
Okay. I mean, it's interesting. You said that you've used job evaluation and all the roles were evaluated, which means that, you are managing things in a fair and a consistent way behind the scenes. But I guess what it means is that if we don't have a grading structure, we're not really benefiting from having that fairness and consistency, because while we're doing it in the background, nobody sees the evidence of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, without, and this is not a criticism of my team, the company just hadn't invested in that kind of reward skill set. Like I said, we'd outsourced a lot of that work externally. We're now rectifying that because I think it's really important that, these are our people, it is our pay. Yes, okay, we purchase the benchmarking data externally, but we need to be confident that it's right for our organization and that we're paying fairly and consistently and in line with the market. So yes, 100%. We weren't getting that benefit. Now, as I said, no system is perfect, and we will always have people disagreeing that roles are the same level or saying that this role is worth more than others. And that's for me where the education piece comes from, because even in companies where that did exist, I've spent quite a lot of time in my earlier career when I was a reward professional in a former life, upskilling people teams and managers around pay. Because I think oftentimes we talk about these principles, we talk about job evaluation, we talk about benchmark, we talk about medians and upper quartiles, and we kind of assume that everyone knows what we're talking about. And oftentimes they don't, and maybe they don't want to own up that they don't. So for me, bringing those kind of concepts to life in kind of upskilling of our managers is absolutely key. Because otherwise, if you go to the route of grading and full transparency, we're just going to have a queue of 200 employees to their people business partner saying, hang on a minute, can I just query this? We need our managers to be able to have those conversations. So that's part of our plan as well.
Yeah, I mean, those things are definitely linked, aren't they? Because if we have all of this work being done in the background and there isn't that transparency around grading, actually it's not entirely our managers' fault, because they're not equipped and they don't have the information to have some of those meaningful conversations. And I think we're also starting to see, I think particularly with Gen Z employees, what they're really, while pay is a really important issue for them, it's things like, the work environment and career development that they really care about. So are you seeing in recruitment candidates asking you about whether you have a grading structure or what sort of career path they'll be getting?
Yeah, probably less so on the grading structure, because I think, I guess particularly with Gen Z, we have a reasonable proportion of Gen Z employees. Our average age is in the early 30s in our organisation. So actually we have, I think, 4 generations represented in our workforce. We are a multi-generational workforce, but we recruit quite a lot in terms of like graduates or people who've early stages of their career. I think the question is more progression, 100%. And look, we're, like I said, we're under 300 employees. We're growing. We do have lots of opportunities. And actually, last year we filled a quarter of our roles internally. So we absolutely do and can progress our people. But we also recognise we're not a big multinational, and therefore we will sometimes lose people because they want to progress their career and simply we don't have the role available for them because of a product of our size and scale. So I think we definitely get questions about that on joining, and equally it will be one of the kind of key reasons why people leave, as I said. And obviously we'll try and retain as many people as we can, but we also, like I said, need to recognise that won't always be possible in our organisation today.
Yeah, definitely. And you touched earlier on manager capability. And as we increase transparency, whether it's to do with grading or career paths, employees are not all going to come to HR with questions. They're going to go to their managers. And so is there anything that you've done to try and upskill your managers? And where do you see is the biggest gap in those skills that the managers are lacking?
Yeah, so as my team would tell you, if you spoke to them, manager capability is probably my biggest, probably the biggest thing I talk about in all things people, because I think, good managers are so essential to the people experience. The adage, you join a company, you leave a manager is still, I think, still holds fairly true. And I think, people management can be hard. And often managers, and I'm not just saying this for our organisation, I've seen this in other companies as well, often feel underinvested in. They're promoted because they're really good technically and they're what they do. We want to give them an opportunity to progress. And too often companies don't give them the skills so that they can do that confidently. And as I said, people management can be challenging. I've been managing people for 20 plus years, and certainly keeps me on my toes day to day. But if you don't give them the skills to do that, like you said, then unfortunately that does lead to an over-reliance on a HR team for things that actually you would want the managers to own. But that's not me criticising the managers, because like I said, they're doing their best. And oftentimes I think HR teams can be too critical of line managers, and well, the manager didn't do this and they didn't do this right. But actually we never made it clear what we expected of them in the first place, and how can we criticise when they've not done this thing they didn't know they needed to do, or they didn't have the skills to do. At the end of the day, we put them in the position. So yeah, I think a lot of people kind of fall into line management because they think it's the only way to progress their career. So I guess going back to the grading structure point at the beginning, I strongly believe that in a grading structure, you should have a people management route and then a technical track or an individual contributor track, because actually the business needs subject matter expertise. That doesn't mean that the only way to progress is by managing bigger and bigger teams. In our organisation, we've got some really deep technical experts, and they can still contribute significantly to the organisation at a senior level. Doesn't necessarily mean that they need to manage people.
Yeah, you made a really good point earlier around how, a lot of people are promoted because they're good at their job, they're good technically, but don't necessarily have the people management skills, or, in some cases they're even reluctant to take on that responsibility because either they don't like it or they feel that they're not equipped to do it. So in those cases, you mentioned having the different ladders, so your people management and technical, but I think a lot of HR people who might be listening to this will be thinking, well, we don't have the size to be able to differentiate between those two different types of roles. So in that case, do you think that anyone who doesn't have those skills or is reluctant should still be given those skills and encouraged down that management path, or is that a bad idea?
Yeah, so like I said, it is this kind of concept of the accidental manager or even the reluctant line manager. As I said, we are probably now of the size and scale where we could make that work. Like I said, that people manager track, technical track, we could make that work in our organisation, but it would still be a new concept. I've talked to my senior colleagues about that. We've talked to, maybe some of our senior leaders will be familiar that that's the kind of direction we're going in, but it isn't a concept that necessarily all of our employees would recognise. And I think it will take some time to adjust the mindset that is, like I said, that is the only route, just because that's all people have known up to now. So yes, I recognise that in a very small organisation, as I said, the smallest company I've worked in was about 90 people, that might be you might just not have the sheer number of roles to be able to make that framework work. But I guess for me, oftentimes you see very small spans of control, particularly in smaller organisations. So we go, this person needs line management skills. Let's give them someone to manage. I know, we'll give them the graduate or the apprentice. That's their starter for management. And they've got one direct report. And you look at all of the studies around management and spans of control, the reason, obviously, to have those broader is the amount of time that people spend on people management is significant and should be. But if you've got too many people managing one person, as often is the case in smaller organisations, that isn't necessarily a particularly efficient way of working. So good intentions to give people management experience, but then from an organisation design perspective, decision making, speed, quality, like I said, just and pure efficiency, that it could also kind of bring some challenges. So now there isn't a hard and fast about what a span of control should be. It depends on what the roles are and, what type of work people are doing. But, I think certainly you would want to try and avoid those one-to-one relationships where you can.
Okay. And so if we stick with the management for now, there's the other side of, it's not just capability. Do you also see evidence of, and I guess this is human nature, where if you feel like you're going to have an uncomfortable conversation with someone, you would avoid having that conversation? And so do you see evidence of that from managers where they don't necessarily lack the capability, but they're reluctant or avoiding having a difficult conversation with people?
Yeah, so I think when I talk about our managers and upskilling, I talk about confidence and capability. Because, like you said, you can train people, give them the skills, they can attend a workshop about feedback, but then they need to have the confidence to be able to deploy those. And as I said, line management can be hard. Nobody wants to deliver bad news. It's not in our makeup. We want to tell people good things, and we want to tell them things they're going to be happy about. And so, yes, absolutely, the hesitation to deliver bad news, because like you said, you don't, you fear the reaction. Sometimes, I also think people are very aware of their rights, and, are very aware of their kind of boundaries and barriers as well. So I think sometimes managers fear that they might create some kind of employee relations issue or a legal issue if they say the wrong thing. So I think there is genuinely, some nervousness around that. So yeah, absolutely. And as I said, I'm not going to be critical of those people, because I remember my first line manager role, I didn't do it very well. I remember I had a problem in my team and I didn't address it. I didn't have those difficult conversations. I just loaded up the other people as well. And my manager had to, give me some feedback to say, that's not really going to be sustainable. And, that was a big lesson for me. But equally, as I said, I've been managing teams for over 20 years. I don't pretend I'm the perfect manager now, but you do, through the experience of having to do this, you will become more practiced, you will become more skilled, you'll understand how to, kind of read people or understand different motivations just by virtue of the fact you've had more opportunity to do it.
Thanks. So that's great advice for anyone who's looking to get into management, is just practice. I guess even with, you don't necessarily have to be in that situation, but you can practice those conversations before you're put in that position. Let's discuss a topic that I think is of interest to everyone at this stage, which is AI. Is that something that you use in your role, and what do you think, what do you see as the most promising application of AI in HR right now?
Yeah, so I would say our organisation, actually, we're just recruiting our first AI specialist roles at the moment. So up to now, we've had a sort of group of very passionate, interested people working together on this topic. We're now at the point where we're actually going to recruit into this specialism and then really kind of set out, where are the opportunities in our business in a more structured and way as part of our, BAU. So that's really exciting for our organisation, and I'm really pleased that we're at that stage in our evolution. I would say for me and in my team, I think the use cases today are probably more in terms of things that, you would have had to sit down and write. So a training course, a policy, being able to go in and go, actually, ChatGPT or other tool, Copilot actually is the tool that we use internally. Give me a policy on health and safety, please, and do it in this style and tone, I think is, clearly a very kind of a strong user case today. And I think, but equally, I recognise that to do that, people need to have the tools, but also, again, going back to the early point, they need to have the confidence in how to use them. And I think one of my experiences, having worked in technology businesses in the latter part of my career, is don't assume that everyone is as pro AI as you are, because particularly in tech companies, you just go, well, it's a tech company, right? Of course everyone's got to be pro it. And actually, in my experience, that's a bit of a naive assumption, because actually, if you're a software engineer who's honed your craft for years, and then suddenly, it's like, well, actually, you can do twice as much today. I can understand the new acronym that seems to be floating around, which is FOBO, fear of being obsolete, is a real thing. And, you see the jobs that are going to be removed by AI. So I do think that you have to kind of manage use of AI in a company as you would any kind of organizational change. You need to think about how to take people with you, not just, oh, aren't we all excited? Look at this. But so I think that's kind of my own reflection on it. As I said, in our organisation, that's definitely the approach we're keen to take. But as I said, but don't assume that everyone is naturally just going to embrace it. Like I said, but it also needs to become second nature. So I had a conversation the other day, And somebody said, oh, well, couldn't we just ask Copilot to do that for us? And some of the people in the room went, I genuinely just wouldn't have thought of that. So just having someone in the room to go, hang on a minute, we can probably save ourselves a load of time here. I think it will take a time though to become second nature, but you have to give people the tools and some guardrails of how to use the tools, obviously from a confidentiality, from an ethical point of view. But then, like I said, you sort of need to, make sure that you take people on that journey with you.
I really like that you used the fear of becoming obsolete. But I think, we probably have to accept that that AI is coming, regardless of whether there's, reluctance to accept it. And I think there's also a possibility, because it's not a simple case of if somebody has access to AI, they can deliver the same quality output that somebody else can, because it's how you use it and what sort of prompt you use and what information you provide. And do you think there's a possibility that actually people who are afraid of becoming obsolete might not use AI at all and actually end up in a position where they're not able to use AI and they lose out as a result, because it's not the AI that is taking over their job, but it's the other person who is able to use AI is taking their job?
Yeah, you preempted what I was going to say there, because at the CIPD Festival of Work a few weeks ago, that's exactly the point that was being made. AI probably won't replace your job, but somebody who embraces it and uses it well may do. And I think that is the reality. There is no getting away from that. There was one study, and I'm not able to quote it, so I'll just have to mention it, that when there are certain tasks, however, where actually human and AI together produce the best outcomes, and they are things that involve broad context, interpersonal sensitivity, and content creation. So in all of those cases, actually it's human plus AI that deliver the stronger outcome. So actually, I think that's where organisations need to focus. Not, AI is going to replace us, but actually, how do we as humans really embrace and leverage what is there to actually create a better outcome with the two combined?
Great. Thanks a lot, Rachel, for all of your advice and tips on grading manager capability and AI. And one question that I'm going to have to ask you before you go, which I ask all my guests, is can you tell me what your favorite film is and why?
Yeah, so I thought about this ahead of time, and so my highbrow answer, or more highbrow answer, should I say, would be Breakfast at Tiffany's, which is one of my all-time favourites. It's not particularly novel, but it was one of my granddad's favourite films, and it reminds me of sitting and watching that with my granddad. I still love that film. I could watch it again and again. But actually, if I'm going to be really lowbrow, I love a film with a dance-off in. I love a dance-off.
A dance-off, okay.
Yeah, so American Pie 3, The Wedding, would be my controversial lowbrow choice.
Okay. I definitely I remember the original, but I'm not sure I can remember the. Did you say The Wedding?
Yeah, American Pie 3, The Wedding has a very excellent scene where Stifler is in a dance-off, which is, there you go. So, yeah, any film with a dance-off in it gets my vote. But yes, I don't think it's going to win any Oscars, put it that way.
Yeah. The dance-off always reminds me of the David Brent dance-off in The Office as well.
Yeah, that's the most uncomfortable dance-off of all time. Yes, but yeah, any film with a dance-off gets my vote.
Okay, great, and of course, Breakfast in Tiffany's is a classic as well.
Yeah.
So, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, Rachel, what is the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is always a good place to find me. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn, so Rachel Cox, and the company I work for is Low Carbon Contracts Company, or LCCC, as you said at the start. So yeah, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.
Great, thanks, Rachel. And if there's anything or any links that we can share in the program notes, we'll do that with our listeners. So thanks again, Rachel, for sharing your insights. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you again on the next episode of A Case of the Mondays.
Enjoy this episode? Join the Academy for free and have access to CPD certified reward training, quarterly reward community sessions, first access to salary insights reports, reward and benefits market data, and hundreds of free practical tools and templates.